So this is the final section in a 3-session class. The first week we sort of did a mad dash through Shir Hashirim, through the Song of Songs, and it was kind of following up on Rabbi Daniel's idea about how did certain stories or books or Megillot get to be in the canon of what we consider the Tanakh. So he was talking a lot about how the rabbis justify having certain things in the canon, and also what function those things perform. So, for example, Megillat Esther performs a function. It talks about how to survive when you are not the dominant culture, how to survive in exile, and also it's kind of a message of bravery and hopefulness and how to maintain. And Song of Songs is part of our canon mostly by this incredible, lush, rich poetry, which could not be denied. The rabbis just simply could not keep it out of our canon because the poetry was very much in the nature of Middle East poetry. So it was already a form that was well known, and that's why it has to be koshered, so to speak. The Book of Ruth, on the other hand, as we said last week, has mentions of God all over the place. You know, God is not mentioned in Shir Hashirim, and God is not mentioned in Megillat Esther, but it is all over the Book of Ruth. And that's part of the way that Ruth gets to be in our canon. But the other part is that it fulfills a function. It bridges a gap between two ideas. And one is who's in and who is out. Because as you all noted last week, Ruth is a Moabite, and the Moabites shall have, you know, in the Torah, it says that you shall not have a Moabite in the community. You can't marry a Moabite. And here's Ruth, she comes along. So one of the ways that the Book of Ruth functions in our canon is that it allows us to bring into the community of the house of Israel all these people who perhaps were considered marginal or even outside of the group. But there's another way that this book is useful and that the rabbis cannot deny it. And we're going to see it today as we look at the last 2 chapters. As I said last week, Book of Ruth is very short. It's only 4 chapters. Many synagogues do all 4 books of it on Shavuot. And it's a story you can tell. When we go back to the text, I want you to think again about what it means to tell the story. You know, how it would feel as a storyteller, which is how I initially came to this reading of the Book of Ruth, was that I was a classic storyteller. I was somebody who went out in front of a bunch of people and said, once there was. And so as a storyteller, when I read Book of Ruth, I see all those moments where the storyteller might have said, and then what do you think happened? So I see that in the text. I could almost toss the text over my shoulder and tell the story. But the text is so glorious. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So here we are at the end of the 2nd chapter. And at the end of the 2nd chapter, what we have is, so, you know, Ruth has been gleaning, and she happens to glean in the fields of Boaz. That's that miracle that happens. That's the part of the story that is the magical moment, right? A fairy tale has to have a magical something in it. That's your magical moment, where she somehow manages to glean in the fields of Boaz. So she stays close to the maidservants of Boaz, and she gleaned until the barley harvest and the wheat harvest were finished. And then she stayed at home with her mother-in-law. And this is the moment where if you wanted to, if this wasn't a fairy tale and it did not need a proper happy ending, you could draw a line right under this and say the end. You know, she did what she was told and she gleaned, and the end. But that's not the end of our story, because there are certain things that are left hanging. So that's our situation now. So Naomi, her mother-in-law, says to her, daughter, I must seek a home for you where you may be happy. And that is not a really great word-to-word translation of the Hebrew, because in the Hebrew it says, Vatomer lach Naomi, chamota, her mother-in-law, biti, my daughter, which I think actually needs to be said in the translation, my daughter. Halo avakesh lach manoach. I have to find for you peace or security or tranquility. I have to find you rest. And it gets translated as a home, which I think is really a terrible translation. That I have to find you some sort of security. And in that world, security, manoach, is in a marriage, right? You have to be married in order that you may be happy. And what Naomi does not say is, I need to find somebody who will redeem my portion of land so that I can go on and have what I need. Now, here is our kinsman, Boaz, right? Because you married my son, so you and I have kin, and Boaz is our kin. And we mentioned that the names of the people in a folktale or a fairy tale, they symbolize the attributes of that person. So Naomi means pleasantness, and Ruth indicates, even though there's a letter missing from the word, it indicates friendship. Boaz is strength and power. Here's our kinsman Boaz, whose girls you were close to, and he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. So the one thing that the text doesn't tell us is how much time lapsed between the end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3, because I think as a storyteller, I would have said, now after some time, or in in another month or so, I would have stuck in some sort of designation, but we don't know. So he's going to be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. Now, we need to understand what a threshing floor is to understand the rest of the story. A threshing floor is not a small place. It's huge. It's huge. In that threshing floor, every single farmer who has brought in their crop of grain, right, wheat or barley, every single one of them will be working at the same time to winnow the harvest, to throw the barley up in the air, and the wind catches the chaff and pushes it away, and that's how you get your grain. And in this huge floor, many things will be happening. It is a place of great joy. It's a place of celebration. It might be a place where people get drunk, and it might be a place where inappropriate liaisons happen. You know, you never know who's going to drop by on the threshing floor. So here's this wonderful verse. Rachatzt, besacht, besamt simlotayich. Bathe and anoint yourself and dress up. Where, by the way, I'm not looking at all the faces, so you have to just chime in. Where else do we see that sequence of events? I'll stop sharing for a sec so I can see you. Where else do we see that sequence of events where you bathed, a woman is told to bathe and to anoint herself, that's with sweet smelling perfume or oil, and get dressed and look good?
Willing.
Where?
Esther.
Esther, right in the book of Esther, the same sequence of events, the exact same thing. And we're going to see it somewhere else. We're going to see it somewhere else. I'm very excited to show you. So here she is following a tradition. You bathe, you put on sweet oil, you dress yourself as well as you can. and you go to the threshing floor because that's where all the action is. All the goodies are going to happen on the threshing floor. It's so exciting. Okay, let's go back. And then go down to the threshing floor, but don't go over, don't say howdy. Don't disclose yourself to the man. And the word that's used, by the way, is Viarat Hagorin Altivadi Leish. Don't make yourself known to the man. Don't make yourself known to him. I sometimes I take exception to the translations that we have here. I think that they're a little less than precise, and it gives us a different reading, somebody's idea of what's the standard reading, but I think that this is a good one. To say, don't disclose yourself, don't reveal yourself, don't make yourself known. That's the word I'm looking at. Until he has finished eating and drinking. All right? We want him full and sated and maybe a little drunk. When he lies down, note the place where he lies down and go over and uncover his feet, which, as many of you probably know, is kind of a euphemism for genitalia, although it's very careful to say, and then just lie down. Uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. So he's asleep. She uncovers some part of the southern part of his body. He gets cold, right, on the winnowing floor, and he wakes up and he sees her, and then that's something's going to happen right there. And she says, everything you tell me to do, I will do. It really reminds me, even though it's not an exact translation, of E'aseh v'eshma, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will listen. So whatever it is that Naomi tells Ruth to do, she's going to do. So Naomi is our protagonist here. The book might be called Ruth, but Naomi is truly the moving factor here. So she does exactly what mother-in-law told her to do. She gets dressed. She goes down to the threshing floor. She did just what her mother-in-law had instructed. Boaz ate and drank and was in a cheerful mood and went to lie down beside the grain pile. By the way, if you think about it, why does he not go home? Because his entire wealth, his entire produce is lying right there on the grain floor. You don't want to go home. You want to sit there all night until such time as you can take that away. You're going to take some of it away to a place where it's going to be ground into flour, and then that's going to be what you're going to sell. But you're most certainly not going to have all of your entire wealth from the harvest be unprotected. So he's happy. He goes down and she goes over to him and uncovers his feet, and then she lays down next to him. Now, that's not kosher. It's a suspicious thing to do. It's not illicit, it's suspect. It makes her look like she's a whore. It's weird, but it's what mom told her to do, so she does it. And then in the middle of the night, he gave a start and he pulls back, but there lying at his feet was a woman. And I absolutely can imagine telling this to a crowd of people all sitting around, trying not to laugh with their hands over their mouth while I'm saying, and you know what happened? He woke up in the dark and there was a woman lying at his feet. And it's dark, so he doesn't know her. Who are you? Even though he saw her plain as day when she was gathering, when she was getting grain from his field. And she says, she does not say, I am Naomi's daughter-in-law. She does not say, I am Ruth the Moabite. She says, I am Ruth Amatecha. She identifies herself as already a member of his household, not as a wife, but as a handmaid. I am your handmaid. Spread over me spread over your handmaid a corner, kanafecha, a corner of your robe, because you are a redeeming kinsman. Where else do we see this concept of somebody spreading a kanaf, a wing, a corner of a garment? Where else do we see that phrase being used? Yes, you're thinking it, but you're not saying it. Rosalie, were you going to say something?
I was sort of thinking of Moses.
You could think of Moses, but it's actually sort of higher up. We ask God to spread,
Oh, yeah.
right? To be sheltered under the wings of God's kanaf, wing, or
Sukkot. We also say Sukkot Shalomecha, but it's but they're often synonymous. The kanaf and the sukkah, because that's, it's like the talit over the
exactly. The implication is the talit fabric is this garment, right? Spread over us your protection. So she uses this phrase which says, you are a stand-in for God at this moment. You have the ability to protect me, and by extension to protect Naomi. Or maybe the other way around. I'm not quite sure about the hierarchy of that, because I've been reading Jack Sassen's book and it just blows your mind. It's that good. Okay, so I want now to show you a completely different text. I want to show you a completely different text. And this is from Book of Genesis, from Bereshit chapter 38. I have in my mind that someday I would love to write. Oh, Jack Sassen's book is called, wait, I'll pull it up. I'll show it to you when I go back to screen, okay? It's just called Ruth, and it's unbelievable, very fascinating. So I have in mind to write a book about all the chapters of the Torah that if you took them out, you would lose none of the chronology. And this is one of them, chapter 38 of Bereshit. And I just put up the English, not the Hebrew. So this is about Judah, and he sees a daughter of a Canaanite woman whose name was Shua, and he takes her into his household as a wife. Shua conceives and bears a son named and she conceives again and bears a son named Onan. And finally, she has a third son named Shelah. And Judah got a wife for and her name was Tamar. Now, Judah's firstborn, was displeasing to God, to Hashem, and Hashem took his life. And then, because it was her right, Judah says to Onan, now you go perform Levirate marriage, go join with your brother's wife and do your duty as a brother-in-law and provide offspring. But Onan, he didn't wanna, because he knew that offspring wouldn't count as his. He wouldn't inherit that land from his father. That section of land would go to this other person, this other child. And so he would not impregnate her, right? He wouldn't impregnate her. He refused. And that was displeasing to Hashem, who took his life also. So in this, we see echoes of the fact that Machlon and Chilion die. Why do they die? We don't know. We don't know. In one sentence, they're both bumped off. So at the beginning of the Book of Ruth, we have this exact same situation. Machlon and Chilion die. And now Judah says, look, you know what? My little one is really little. He's not going to be much use to you. Go to your father's house and hang out until Shelah grows up. And then secretly he's thinking to himself, I don't want my third child to die. Tamar is a killer. Okay, so then Shua died. And Judah, now the period of mourning is over. Judah goes up to Timnah, and he's about to go up to the sheep shearers, and Tamar is told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah for sheep shearing. So now you can think about the threshing floor of Ruth and sheep shearing of Breshit as being essentially the same thing. It's where you're going to take in your wealth, and it's where all sorts of things can happen in that situation. So what does she do? She takes off her widow's garb and she covers herself with a veil. Essentially, this is an analog to she washes, she anoints herself, and she dresses up in some other costume. And she puts on a veil because she's going to pose as a Kadesha, which is like a sacred harlot. And he said, you in the veil, right? He can't even see her. Can I sleep with you? And she says, what are you going to pay? Right? And then we have this transaction between Judah and this woman who is, unbeknownst to him, she is his daughter-in-law. And she sleeps with him once, and bingo bango, there's your magical moment. She conceives by him, and off she goes. Okay? And so here is this analog to what's going on in Ruth. He can't pay her back. Time goes on. They find out that she's pregnant. And Judah says, we have to burn her, stone her, get rid of her. And then she shows up with the pledge that he left. And she says, here are the seal and the cord and the staff of the man who impregnated me. Do you know them? And Judah recognizes them. And he says, to his credit, she is more in the right as I am, because I withheld my third son. And that was the end of that. She has twins in her womb. We've already seen that in Rebecca having twins, right? And also they're going to vie for who gets to come out first. The crimson thread, the thread that we think of sort of as a bundle, is tied around the hand of the little one that sticks out a hand first, but ups, it goes back, and out comes its brother, and she names the brother Peretz, which means a breach, right? And the second one is named Zerah. Now let's go back to Ruth, okay? So Ruth says, I'm your handmaiden. And he says, you are blessed of the Lord, as in you are more righteous than I. Your latest deed of loyalty is greater than your first. Why? Because you did not turn to younger men. That is, your husband died, and you could have stayed home in Moab and let Naomi go. But not only have you been true to Naomi, but you're here with me, and I'm an older guy. And that is like another deed of loyalty, because you're going to keep it in the family. You're going to keep both the inheritance and the bloodline in the family of Naomi, meaning Elimelech. So now he says, okay, now, don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of it. And he calls her BT, just the same way that Ruth called her BT. Boaz calls her BT, my daughter. My daughter. Don't worry about it. I'm going to do whatever you ask. And he's not just thinking about redeeming Naomi, he's thinking about taking her as a wife. But he says to her, it's true, I am a goel, I'm a redeemer. And that word, where else do we use that word? We use it in reference to God. Not only am I a redeemer, but I can't do what I want to do because there's somebody with a closer attachment, a closer cousin, right? Karov in modern Hebrew, a karov is a cousin. So any relative, but specifically applied to cousins. So there's somebody else who's closer than I am. So I can't just ride over that. I have to do this all legally by the book. So stick around, and in the morning, I'll deal with this. I'll take care of this. If he will redeem, then great. And if not, then I will do it. Lie down until morning. He doesn't send her home in the middle of the night. He tells her to stick around. I love this stuff. So she lays down at his feet, which if you want to translate as genitals, you can, but you could also say that she doesn't lie side to side with him. She lies a little bit away, like at his feet. You could translate it that way or think of it that way. But she knows that what she's done is suspicious, inappropriate. So she gets up before dawn, and maybe he wakes her, and he says, "Let it not be known that this woman came to the threshing floor," so that the liaison that I'm going to create with this woman is clear. I don't have any entanglements. Nobody can accuse me of anything, or her for that matter. But here's this thing about kindness. He says, "Hold out your shawl." And remember, she said, this is about garments, right? She puts on beautiful clothes. She says to him, "Put your clothes, your garment over me and shelter me." And he says, "Hold out your shawl." And if we think about the other text, Tamar puts on a veil. It's all connected, all these little bits of clothing. She holds out her shawl. He measures out a ton of barley and ties it up, sticks it on her back, and off she goes home. And when she goes home, and here's another thing to remember, all Naomi does is tell her to go there and lie down at his feet. And Naomi says to her, "He'll tell you what to do." But that's not what happens. Here in this book, at this very moment, this is where Ruth has agency, where she takes over action, where she takes over the action and is her own agent. So when she comes home and Naomi says, "How was it with you, my daughter?" And she says all of the things that the man had done. He gave me barley, and he says, "Don't go back empty-handed, and he's going to take care of me. He's going to redeem me." And here at the end of the chapter is kind of the tie-up. And Naomi says, "Now, you stay right here, because this is going to get solved, because the man will not rest, but he will settle the matter today." And now we're going to have the big wrap up where all the pieces get wrapped up. So now, in the light of day, Boaz goes down to the gate, because everything, right? In the ancient world, think about all of the places where there's action, where there's stuff happening. The well. Oh my gosh, everything happens at the well, right? The guy goes down to the well and he meets this one. You roll the rock off the well and you meet your beloved, and that's how you get to find Rachel. Moshe goes to the well and he takes care of the girls because the other shepherds are harassing them. All good stuff happens at the well. In this book, all the exciting stuff happens at the threshing floor. But both in Megillat Ruth and Megillat Esther, in both of those books, action happens at the gates of the city, right? That's where things happen, where the public sees what's going on. And that's where Boaz is going to settle this matter. He's going to settle it in public. He's not going to go to some guy's house and knock on the door and say, "Listen, by the way, did you notice Naomi came back with Ruth?" No, he's going to do it out in public so that people can see. And it reminds me, by the way, of how Abraham negotiates a burial plot for Sarah. He does it. He sits down with a whole lot of people witnessing this moment. And so Boaz is going to do the same thing. He's going to do this action in public. He goes down to the gates of the city and he sits there. And now the Redeemer comes. And this is one of my favorite moments where, what's the Redeemer's name? Plony, which in fairy tale language, I guess would be Joe Blow or some guy. I mean, he's got no name. Right. He has no name. It's so exciting. What were you going to say, Marcia?
No, that it's like, I mean, it's Tom, Dick, and Harry, but it's the guy. It's so interesting.
And by the way, the very first time that I went to Israel, I went to the cemetery near the Kinneret. And I went because I was dying to see the grave of Naomi Shemer and to leave a stone there and to think about her songs. But there at that cemetery were so many of the people who came in the first wave of settlers and who died of malaria and other illnesses. There is the grave of Plony ben Plony. And I just think that it's like the unknown soldier in that particular instance. But here's this guy, so-and-so, and he calls him out in front of everybody. And he gathers 10 elders because we know 10 is a minyan. 10 can do things that it's like a court, like a court of law. And they all sat down, nice little circle. And he says, listen, Naomi has just returned from the country of Moab. And how is she going to live? She's going to have to sell the piece of land which was left by Elimelech. Remember Elimelech, who lives and dies in like 2 sentences. So somebody is going to have to redeem that land so that it does not leave the family and the tribe, right? The tribe of Ephraim, the tribe has to remain, the hereditary holdings of the tribe have to remain held. So he's saying somebody's got to redeem that land. And I thought I'd let you know, because you are closer in relationship to her than I am. So if you are willing to, that is, if you're willing to fork out the money to redeem this land so that Naomi can have a proper life, that she can live well, fine. But if not, tell me, because I'm next in line. There's no one to redeem but you and then me. And Plony says, okay, I'll redeem. But, and here's the kind of where the trap springs, Boaz says, but when you acquire the property for Naomi and from Ruth the Moabite, you must also acquire the wife of the deceased, because the estate has to pass to a male heir, right? And Naomi doesn't have one, she needs one. So when you get the land, you also have to acquire. And that word, kanita, is the word that's used for kedushin, for acquiring a wife. It's the same word. To acquire a wife means to be invested financially in that acquisition. And that's going to mean that not only do you have to pay for the property, but the property is not going to go to your children. It's going to go to Ruth the Moabite's kids.
But so how do we know there, though? That's interesting. I've never thought about this, that it's not Naomi that he has to acquire. Meaning, if he's a kinsman of Elimelech, he could be an old guy. Naomi could be his wife.
Absolutely.
He could acquire the property, and then it could go to his children. Why doesn't he say, no problem, I'll marry Naomi?
Because Naomi can no longer have children, and she doesn't have any anymore. And so the only way that her line is going to be, that line is going to be continued, is through Ruth.
But what if Naomi had no daughter-in-law and she came back and she still had access to her because of ketubah? She still had access to her husband's property. He could technically marry her and then give it to his own children, right?
Yeah, right. But this is the moment, Marcia, where Ruth is validated, right? Where Ruth the Moabite then becomes part of the community. This is the moment when Boaz says she has the right to levirate marriage, because as a Moabite, she wouldn't, right? She doesn't fall under the rules of Israel.
Wow.
That's where it's dicey. Boaz essentially legalizes her. He gives her the imprimatur of being legit.
So would that be comparable to the moment when Judah gives
exactly
to Tamar?
Yeah, exactly. Because Judah says, okay. And we don't even get a word about what Tamar's heritage. Like at no point does it say that Tamar is a Canaanite. It doesn't say where Tamar comes from, but this is still very early days in the whole structure of the family and the Israelite people, whereas Ruth comes along when there are already tribes settled on the land. Ruth, much more than Tamar, has no legal claim, but Boaz gives her legal claim. Boaz says that the line of Elimelech has to be continued, and he has a valid way of continuing it, which is through Ruth.
Yeah.
And this is why this all gets wrapped up. But
By the way, I just want to say this would also be a very interesting proof text for how a rabbi of a community can become the Mara Da'atra. I mean, in this sense, Boaz making a very significant call that is not necessarily obvious and absolutely could be contested by people saying she's a Moabite. It says no, no, no.
And there's no argument, right? He's collected a group of people, elders of the community. They all sit there, and he says she is entitled to Levirate marriage. He doesn't spell it out, but nobody in this crowd says no. And let's remember that this is a fairy tale. Maybe in reality, there would be a whole Sturm und Drang about this. It would be a big deal. But no, this is the story. We have to remember the word historicity. It's not history. It's historicity. It's written backwards. And that's how we validate. That's how we validate Ruth's marriage. And that's how we validate her offspring. And we're going to need that just the same way. And it connects. It connects with the Tamar story. Hang on a sec, because I want to go just like one more chunk and then I'll go back. All right. So you have to connect. You have to have Ruth. And if you have Ruth, then you're not going to get sole ownership. You can't then go sell the property. You can't do anything with this property. And the Redeemer says, nah, forget about it. I can't impair my own estate. I can't give any doubt as to who gets what. You take it over. And now, as was formerly done in Israel, here's your little piece of where the storyteller says, now, I don't know if you know this, but back then, this is how this was done. This is the storyteller giving the whole story of the legal bit, which the audience listening to the story does not know or might have forgotten. The storyteller says, now, back in those days, here's what you had to do. The man would take off his sandal and hand it to the other. And that's your legal moment. That's your moment of legality. So when the Redeemer says to Boaz, nope, you acquire, he takes off his sandal. Bishlov na'alo. All right? Now, by the way, I didn't want to forget that there's a really great movie called I Love You, Rosa. Do you know this movie, Marcia? Oh my goodness, it's
I haven't seen it in about 45 years, but it's a great movie.
But it's a great movie. And in it, a young woman whose very young husband dies suddenly, and who steps up to become her husband, but the 10 or 11 or 12-year-old little boy. And she goes, go home. And he says, no, I want to do right by you, Rosa. And there's this woman through the whole film, the kid grows up, he goes away, she refuses him, she takes him back. But there's this moment where he goes in front of the elders to say, I claim Rosa as my wife, when he's old enough to do so. And she takes off her shoe and she's going to spit in it to say, no, I refuse this one. But she looks at him, she loves him, and so she can't do it. And eventually, at the end of the whole thing, he does end up marrying her. And she's, 10 years older than he is. And they do have children and children's children. And the movie is her telling this story to her great-grandchild while she's on her deathbed. It's so sweet. At any rate, if you can get it, I Love You, Rosa. Okay, let's finish this up because I'm going to run past time and I won't be able to play music, and that'll make me sad. So he takes off his sandal, and Boaz turns to the elders and the rest of the people because, like any courtroom where there's some juicy trial going on, everybody stops to watch, right? You're in a public place. And he says to all of them, Edim atem hayom, you are my witnesses today, that I am acquiring, and again, he uses this word to acquire, kaniti, ki kaniti et asher Elimelech, I am acquiring all that was from Elimelech's, including his wife, and all that belonged to Machlon and Chilion, and I from the hand of Naomi, and I'm acquiring Ruth the Moabite as the wife, as my wife, right? So as to perpetuate, not for my own enlargement, not to enrich me, but so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate, that the name of the deceased may not disappear from among his kinsmen, which is a lot like, I was at a Shiva Minyan this morning, and that idea of that we remember the dead and we do acts of loving kindness in the name of those who have deceased. You are witnesses, and everybody signs their name to this. They say, we are, and may Hashem make this woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built up the house of Israel, prosper in Ephrata and perpetuate your name in Bethlehem. All right? Now, I want to go back to that other text. But the child who came first, right? The firstborn from Tamar out of the house of Judah is named Peretz. Now let's go back to Ruth. And may your house be like the house of Peretz, who Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which Adonai, which Hashem will give you by this young woman. And so, now in the proper order, right? He claims her, he marries her, she becomes his wife, and then he sleeps with her. So there shall be no question about the parentage of this child. And Hashem lets her conceive, and she bears a child. And now this goes back to all those women. This is a book of women everywhere. And the women said to Naomi, blessed be Hashem, who has not withheld a redeemer, a goel from you today. And may his name be perpetuated in Yisrael. And remember also that we call God Gaal Yisrael, the Redeemer of Israel. So that word is thrown all over the place, and God is all over this thing. May he renew your life, Naomi, and sustain your old age, for he is born of your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, certainly better than, plague and destruction, who are her other sons. And Naomi takes the child and holds it to her bosom, which implies that she nurses it, which is kind of extraordinary. But she takes this child, and the neighbor women say, a son is born to Naomi, and they name him Oved. Now, here's the fun part. This is the line of Peretz. Peretz begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot, by this time, everybody I'm telling this story to is saying it with me, Aminadav. Aminadav begot Nachshon. Nachshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz. Boaz begot Oved. Oved begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David. And they lived happily ever after.
So, first of all, how many generations is it from Is it 10 generations from Peretz to David?
Just to go back and look. I
Let's
mean,
count.
I should have.
It is that 10 is also as significant as the genealogies in
Right.
Genesis, from Abraham to Noach, and from Noach to from Adam to Noach, and from Noach to Abraham.
Right. So Peretz, Hezron, Ram, Aminadav, Nachshon, Salmon, Boaz, Oved, Jesse, David. 10. I didn't even think about it, but yes, absolutely 10. Yay.
Well, JCoOC, Marcia, that is so beautiful. And they lived happily ever after.
Okay, so now I want to share with you this beautiful, beautiful piece of music by our late colleague Lawrence Avery of blessed memory, who was the cantor at New Rochelle, Temple Bethel in New Rochelle for many, many, many decades, and who wrote this piece of music that we all know, that we adore. And I just didn't want to leave this hour without sharing some music with you and giving you some chance to talk back. So,
and I just want to say Lawrence Avery was one of my beloved coaches in cantorial school, someone who taught me a lot of great stuff and how to be innovative within the framework of traditional Hazzan. So this is
Marcia, I'll tell you a story about Lawrence Avery. I met him at a convention and I thought, what temerity would it be to ask if he would coach me? So I went up to him and I said, I understand that you sometimes take students. And he said, oh, yes, yes, yes. Are you a soprano? And I said, no, I'm an alto. And he said, then we would say eye to eye on the music. And I said, Cantor Avery, we'd see eye to eye on many things because he was so tiny. He was almost eye to eye with me. He was a short guy. Such a sweetie. Okay, so now I'm going to share this piece of music with you.
It's beautiful.
Isn't that sweet? So gorgeous. So gorgeous. So I want to back up and just say one more thing about the difference between the way that we look at text, where we take the words apart and we take it apart and want to understand all the implications. And by the way, I said I would show the book that was Jack Sassen's book. It's just called Ruth, a new translation with a philological commentary and a formalist, folklorist interpretation. When Jack and I met, and I didn't know that he'd written the book. And I was teaching on Book of Ruth. This was in 2012, probably. This was his area of deep expertise because he's a genius. And he said, well, can I come to your class? And I said, Jack, if you come, you're going to have to teach because I am not teaching in front of you. And he came and taught an amazing, amazing session of my class about the legal issues at stake. What were the legal issues at stake in Ruth? All right, so we do this kind of pulling something apart, really letter by letter almost sometimes. But then as a storyteller, we put all of that together, we throw it over our shoulders, and we just tell the story. And Ruth is one of those, this book is one of those occasions where I can honestly say, I could see myself sitting down on an edge of the threshing floor when all the work was done and everybody was hanging out and eating and drinking and just sitting around. I can imagine telling this story. It is truly a storyteller's delight. It's perfect. It's a perfect story. It's concise, it's short. It does that thing that folktales and fairy tales do, which is it brings in characters like in the blink of an eye and gets rid of them in the blink of an eye. You know, Elimelech was here, then he dies, and his kids were here, and they get married, and then they die. It's very fast. It gets through all the stuff that you really don't need to think about. And it gets to the guts of the story very, very quickly. And then it becomes eloquent around the core people of the story. So there can be an argument made that this should not be called Ruth. It should be called Naomi, the Book of Naomi, or the Book of Women, or something else. You could rename it any one of a million different things, all the way through the story until the moment when Ruth says, I am your handmaiden. Until that moment, it is really Naomi's story. And then Ruth, well, no, maybe by going down to the to glean, that's the moment where she has agency, where she takes initiative, where she says, I'm going to do this. And so there's really kind of, go ahead, Marcia.
Well, I would actually, I would say that the reason it's called Ruth is because it is every moment of this from the minute that she makes the decision not to go back to her parents' house is driven by Ruth. The focus is Naomi. She's the center. She's the one that needs to be healed. But if Ruth had been convinced to go back to her parents, there'd be no story.
There's no book.
So I believe that her agency starts earlier in and in her decision to, I mean, it's her decision to listen to heed her mother-in-law's words.
That's
Just
true,
like-
but remember, the description of Ruth is that she's sticky, right? All of the different things that about Ruth Dafkavo, Ruth sticks to Naomi. She's sticky, and she goes along, and she does what Naomi tells her to. But then there's this moment where she goes above and beyond what Naomi tells her to, and I see that as the moment of agency. But I think there's an argument to be made for the other as well. I think you're right. There's an argument to be made for the other as well.
So one of the things I'd love for you to share with the sort of these people who are meeting you in this sort of little mini series that you've taught are some other areas of things that you love to teach. I'd love to bring you back for some more ALI mini mesters. And I'll talk to my group of friends here and other people. But what are some other sort of courses that you're passionate about?
Well, I think I already did an ALI, not last year, but maybe the year before, maybe in the first year of the pandemic. We did a 3-session course on music, on Jewish music history.
Yes.
No, we did folklore. Did we do Jewish storytelling? Well, all right. So those are two big areas of my interest. And one is this progression of Jewish music from biblical, where all we know about it is here are the instruments that were used, and this is something that looks like it was antiphonal in the Psalms, or from things like Shirat Hayam or Ha'azinu or Dvorah's song with Barak. We know that there were songs sung. I like to trace the history of music all the way up to Israeli pop and rock and the kinds of things that are being written and sung today. Synagogue music, which went from high art to congregational over the course of about 20 years. From 1950 until 1970, there's a transition in synagogue music. So I love teaching on that thing. Because I spent 20 years of my life as a professional storyteller, I love teaching about Jewish stories and storytelling. Those are areas in which I have some feeling that I might actually know enough to be able to teach, because they're. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I love the idea of folklore, and that isn't that, Matt Austerklein has been sort of doing a series of classes that have been fascinating on, the origins of biblical instrumentation, how the modern orchestra can trace its roots back to the Bible. And he's starting one next week, in fact, on sort of the rabbis and pop culture. Like, what was the pop culture of their time that they incorporated into sort of key rabbinic moments in history? So I think but you and I will figure something out, and but I just want to say you are truly not only a wonderful person and a great Hazzan, but a master teacher. And I always love being in your classroom. And I just want to say thank you for honoring us with this class very much.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure. You have such very wonderful and knowledgeable people teaching you. So I'm happy to be in this company. This is a company of learners and teachers. So thank you very, very much.
Do you have any other music to share with us before we go? Any other?
All that Shir HaShirim music. Let me take a moment and share something with you. Hang on a sec. It'll take me a minute to find it. So if you want to fumfer, you can do that. I have like a whole my channel. I have a lot of storytelling on my channel, by the way. Let's look at, where is my playlist for Shir HaShirim? I had so much fun with Shir HaShirim because so many very unlikely things. Not this one. Hang on a sec. All right. I shared with you all a version of Ofra Hazah singing something, Shir HaShirim, and this is my favorite funny one. This is the one that I just thought, oh my goodness, how not like what we would think. So check out this. I'm going to stop it just because that's all there is. It's that. And it's just
Marcia, there's a wonderful Israeli dance that goes to that particular
I know, but
version.
I mean, how not like what you would imagine.
I know.
Here's, go ahead, Marcia.
Ofra Hazah came a long way from that to Prince of Egypt, but also
there's also Simeni Kachotam, which she does, which is exactly the way you would imagine that that you would want this to be done. So, it's the same woman. Oh, I'm sorry.
כי עזה כמוות אהבה, כי עזה כמוות אהבה, קשה כשול קנאה, רשפיה ריש ביש, אש שלהבת ים, מים רבים לא יוכלו לכבות את האהבה, ונהרות ונהרות לא ישטפו אם ייתן איש את כל הון ביתו באהבה, בוז יבוזו לו.
So if I'd ever heard that before, I would have so wanted to do that at one of my JCoOC recitals.
I mean, it's stunning, isn't it? It's really gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. And do we have time for one more?
You do. I'm leaving Sylvia here. I'm gonna sign off, but please. Oh, and
Oh, hang on. Let's get rid of this.
Got this.
I
I've been
can't get rid
using
of
the
anything.
Shaper Cami from Shapermint since I came across.
Okay. All right. The reason I want to play this is because it's the same text, and it's by Joey Weisenberg and the Hadar Ensemble. So it's very modern. It's which means just that Ofra Hazzan we think of as being 50s, 60s, and this is like yesterday. We won't play all of it. It's fine. And I just want you to notice how similar they are in emotion and in style.
Is this Hadar?
Yeah.
Marcia is.
Yes. Okay. know, it is gorgeous. And if anybody wants the link, I'm happy to send you the link for the music. But what I think is interesting about those two pieces of music is that they are 50 years, 70 years apart, but they feel very close to me. Like I could imagine Ofer Hazzan singing Joey Weisenberg's setting. Isn't that something?
Mhm.
All right, my friends.
That's great. Whoop, there we go.
Okay.
Okay. Marcia had to leave, and she asked me to thank everybody for coming, and thank you especially, Rabbi, for teaching a wonderful set of classes.
Hazzan, I don't approach the rabbi
I-
typically,
Okay.
but thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for coming, and look out for more from ALI. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you so much
everybody.
for the class. Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Oh, you can write to me, by the way, hazanlane@gmail.com.
Thank you. All right.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.